I'm David Caputo, Professor of Political Science at Pace University in New York City, and I'd like to welcome you to The Road to the White House. It is our massive open online course dealing with the nominating process for the 2016 presidential race. Now, I realize it may be difficult for anyone to imagine at this point, since so much of the early nominating process has focused on the personalities and the positions of the candidates in terms of both the Democrats and Republicans, in terms of whether it be immigration policy, tax policy, or whatever. But at some point in this spring, and probably also certainly for the general election, we're going to be returning to a discussion about public policy and specific issues that have arisen in the campaign. So I thought it would be interesting, since I want to present both the conservative and the not conservative or liberal position on these things. I thought it would be interesting for you to see Grover Norquist, who's been a long-time advocate of fiscal responsibility in the United States. Some would argue an early conceiver of the concept of the Tea Party in terms of holding the American elected officials responsible for their decisions. But probably the most unique thing and important thing that Grover Norquist has done is he has initiated a number of years ago called the Pledge Against Raising Taxes. And he's asked every member of Congress, and he asks members of the Senate and presidential candidates to sign the pledge saying that they will not vote for any tax increase, and if a tax increase is on the desk of the president, they would veto it. Okay? And he gets, in video, you'll get to hear more of what he has to say about that. But he provides a broad overview of some very conservative but widely held beliefs in the United States about public spending and other aspects. So I'm going to let Mr. Norquist, in his own words, present his argument for you. At times I'll stop the video and come back. I've excerpted it. I've tried to be excerpted so that I've got his major points, and so we'll see as we go forward. So let's begin. By the way, this is on C-SPAN, and this is on the Washington Journal show, which was on Monday the 22nd of February in 2016.
Explosion of taxes. What is fueling that explosion?
It is. It brings taxes up $3.4 trillion over the next decade, and it increases spending over projections $2.5 trillion over the next decade. So it's a Bernie Sanders wish list of more money for the government and more spending from the government. What's interesting is, first of all, none of this is going to happen. His budgets have gone to the Hill, and I think collectively they've gotten 2 votes from the Democrats in the House of Representatives. The Republicans to have fun with the president, take his budget, and ask the Democrats if they want to vote for it, and traditionally they don't. There have been 2 guys. It'd be interesting to catch the names of the 2 who've actually voted for an Obama budget. So it's an exercise in something, where he's trying to make a point or make some friends happy. He has a massive tax increase, about 25 cents on a gallon of gas. He puts it on the barrel, but it comes down to about 25 cents on a gallon of gas, which would double the federal gas tax, more than double the federal gas tax. And all of that money goes to not roads. So if you want a sense of where Obama thinks the modern Democratic Party is not roads, but more bike paths and high-speed trains, which people have decided they don't want. And it's a very interesting thing to take the thing that people really do say they want from the government, which is roads that work, roads that aren't broken down, roads that are wide.
Okay, let me stop right there and indicate that for Norquist and the true fiscal conservatives, they're as concerned with non-income tax increases as they are with income tax increases or changes. So a tax increase that most Americans think of would be in terms of tax rates on their income tax. Norquist is arguing against any sort of tax increase, and in this particular case, he singled out the president's proposal in the budget that a 25-cent increase in the federal excise tax on gasoline.
Away from roads and put it into something else.
In his budget statement, the president said, this budget adheres to last year's bipartisan budget agreement, which I want you to help work us through and how we got to this. He said it also drives down the deficit. It includes smart savings from health care, immigration, and it includes tax reform. Tax reform, certainly something that you've been advocating for.
Yes, but his definition of tax reform is to give the IRS another $1 billion. There's been no reform at the IRS since John Koskinen oversaw the failure to discipline people for going after people for political reasons, auditing people based on political purposes. I served on the Commission on Restructuring the IRS.
Okay, so here's the first mention of being opposed to the IRS and arguing that the IRS is not neutral, that in fact it goes after and penalizes more conservatives and conservative groups.
And I asked the commissioner, the head of the IRS then, I said, I've talked to all my left of center friends. None of their groups are being audited. I've talked to my right of center friends. Many of their groups are being audited. And I was wondering if you could explain to us how you decide who to audit. Oh, we have this very scientific, non-political way of doing it. Great, tell us about it. Oh no, it's a secret, you'll have to trust us. And that trust has been broken, both by the Clinton administration and by the Obama administration. We shouldn't be giving more money to the IRS specifically to reward the people who are supposed to be checking people's taxes when they've been targeting people politically. This has really got to end.
Is there a tax reform plan that's being talked about on the campaign trail by any of the candidates right now that you've endorsed or you could get behind?
I have said very nice things about each of the Republican candidates, because what's interesting is while the Democrats, Hillary Clinton is being marched hard left with Obama at one elbow and the Vermont senator at the other elbow, and Obama's both governance over the last 7-8 years and his new spend and tax budget drive her to the left, because she can't turn to him and say, hey, this is crazy, I don't want to go where you want to go. And Bernie Sanders has also moved her off to the left. She did not want to run as the tax increasing, gun grabbing, very left candidate. She wanted to run the way her husband had run, on the moderate or something like that. But she's so far off the moderate path, again, because these two men picked her up by the elbows and carried her off. It's not necessarily a political decision that she would have wanted to run that way. Now, on the Republican side, and so she's just agreed to all the tax increases these other guys have supported. On the Republican side, what's interesting, I know they yell at each other and they call each other names and low energy and this, that, and the other thing, but in point of fact, on taxes, all but Bush made the commitment never to raise taxes. I share with all candidates for office the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, and we asked them to make a commitment in writing, just verbally, but in writing. I won't raise taxes, or as a president, I'll veto a tax increase. And we have strong support in the House and Senate that can and will stop any tax increase, even if a Democrat's president, which is why Obama's tax increases are dead on arrival, the discussion of them. But on the Republican side, they all dramatically reduce rates. We have an international competitiveness problem. Our corporate rate, our business tax, is at 35% rate. The French are at 25%. The Chinese are at 25%. The Canadians are under 20%. The European average is 20%. So half of Europe is below 25%. We're at 35%, and we wonder why our companies can't compete, and why if a Belgian company buys an American company that's international, it's worth more, because Belgian...
Okay, I'm going to pause for just a minute and point out three major things that he says. One is the usual argument against liberal Democrats is that they tax and spend. Tax first and then spend that tax money. He's reversed it. He is talking about the Obama budget, spending first and then raising taxes. Because the argument is that under this budget, the tax increases would have to come several years out in order to match the outlays. Otherwise, we get into even a larger deficit situation. Second thing, he talks specifically about his pledge, his non-tax increase pledge. And third thing is the last point, is that the argument that the American tax on business earnings, a 35% top tax, is simply puts American companies at a disadvantage, and then also talks about why foreign companies want to buy American companies and what that means. So I'm going to leave that portion for a moment and go to another.
I think two things. One is you should take away all of the special interest requirements like Davis-Bacon, like prevailing wage, so that we're not spending more than you need to build roads and so on. We have environmental laws, which when you expand a road, you have to double check and see whether it's going to irritate the Ferber-Schloutworth or something. There's already a road there, okay? And so a lot of those restrictions and regulations which make it difficult to simply add a lane to roads, which is nonsense. Why should you wait years to have an EPA study about an additional lane? I sort of, if you're running a road through a forest that never had a road before, you might want to take a look at that. But expanding
Okay, so he's identified what is going to be one of the key aspects of the campaign, and that is rebuilding America's infrastructure. And he is arguing that before we raise taxes or increase spending, in order to do so, there are other ways to achieve savings. And one is to do away with some of the legislative requirements which favor organized labor in terms of prevailing wage and other aspects in terms of hiring different types of individuals. And he also would argue against doing environmental impact, especially when you're talking about expanding an already existing road versus building a new road. So again, you can see where his emphasis is not only in terms of trying to stress alternative ways. The government's too big, the federal government's too big, too cumbersome, but also that there are ways to expand and rebuild the infrastructure by simply reallocating money that we currently have. He also makes another point which I don't believe is on here, where he talks about how in some cases at the state level, states have used money, tax revenues that have been raised for one purpose, they've used it for other purposes, and he argues that that is wrong.
Obama's allowed no tort reform to be passed. Now at the state level, a lot of states are passing tort reform and making some real progress, and you're seeing doctors move to Texas because the tort laws are not as stupid as they are in other states. Manufacturing is leaving those states with bad tort laws that make it easy to sue people and so on for no reason at all.
Okay, now we see another key example that the conservatives feel strongly about, and that is tort reform, arguing that it's simply too easy to sue over product liability, over behavior liability in many states. And the argument is that those states are going to lose industries, and that we need state reform, tort reform at the state level, and there ought to be some sort of legislation passed to put limits on what individuals can get in terms of lawsuits, limits in terms of the type of individuals and organizations that they can sue.
There's an interesting chart here which gives you some sense of the direction of the country at the state level. The federal level, we have Republican House and Senate, Democrat president, nothing's moved in 8 years with that. But at the state level, you see that 23 states have a Republican governor, House and Senate, completely Republican.
That's the red on
the
the
red
chart.
states. 8 yellow states have both houses are Republican, House and Senate, but there's a Democrat governor. There are 7 states that are completely Democrat. That's California and 6 others, smaller states. And then there are a number of states, 4 states that are green, because Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts all have.
All right, this is an important map, and is another key aspect of the conservative argument is that things ought to be done at the state level. And what he has shown here is where you have the Republicans controlling the governor and the state legislatures, that's the red states, that you get significant reform along the lines that he's been talking about. And in the white states, where you have the governor and one chamber controlled by the Democrats, you get less that. And then he talks about the other states that have different types of mixed control.
Democrat legislatures, but a Republican governor. So at the state level, people are voting for elected officials that are going for lower taxes, less spending. In Tennessee, they're about to vote shortly on making that state completely income tax free. It's mostly income tax free, but there's still this thing called the Hall tax. They're going to vote in Tennessee to become a no income tax state at the state level. That will make 9 states without any income tax at all. And that's very helpful to growth. Florida has been growing.
Okay, that's not his final, but that's his last major argument, and that is opposing state income taxes. And the argument is very clear. Without state income taxes, you're going to have the potential for economic growth, economic change, economic vitality. He makes one other point which I did not include on the video, but which I think is very important. He makes the case that any tax increase is in fact a pay reduction for the person who has to pay that tax. He doesn't get into the other side of the coin, that perhaps your taxes also bring you benefits. He is, and the conservatives who identify with him are against government spending, period. Okay? A few exceptions, national defense would be one, some limited other programs. But by and large, they see the United States grossly overspending and having to really do something to balance balance the budget and reduce the large deficit, the 18 trillion, 19 trillion dollar deficit. So I wanted you to hear Norquist in his own words. This is, if you go to C-SPAN, you can watch the entire 45 minutes or so of the interview, and he basically is able to lay out the argument, the fiscal arguments, the fiscal conservative argument. We'll come back and talk about the other side of that in another lecture. Thank you.